Hi guys, I hope all of you are doing well. So I welcome you all to yet another video in this AWS data engineering certification course, and in this particular video we are going to talk about the domain 3 of our certification exam. That will be data operations and supports. So till now we have covered two domains. So the domain 1 was data transformation, right? And this like data ingestion and transformation, and the second domain was data storage. So as we have already talked about these things in the previous video, so I would highly recommend you guys to watch first of all those two videos in which I have talked about the domain 1 and domain 2, right? Because if you are not very well aware about these two domains, maybe this third domain you won't get everything that I'm trying to convey, right? So I would highly recommend you to first of all these two videos, right? And then you can continue watching this video if you have not watching these two videos. So with that said, let's get started with this video and let's get straight into the system. So as we have already discussed about domain 1 and domain 2, and we are aware about the fact that these two domains will have 60% of the weightage of the scored content, right? And again, if I talk about domain 3, so domain 3 will have another 22% of the weightage if I talk about the scored content. So combined weightage is around 72%, right? Sorry, 82%, right? So the combined weightage comes to 82%, and you need around 72% marks to get your certification exam cleared, right? So even if you are not very well aware about data security and governance, because see, I can totally relate to this being a data engineer, that the data security and governance sometimes is a domain which the top level data engineers, means if you are a, let's suppose, data engineering manager, right? If you are a kind of VP, right? Or if you are into the project management domain, then you get those then you get that opportunity to use those services, right? And on a day-to-day basis we don't even use these services, right? The services that we'll be talking about, right? Like AWS IAM, then we will be using AWS key value store and all those things. So we don't use these services on a day-to-day basis. So maybe we don't have that much proficiency in those services as compared to the services that we are using in these three domains, because these services we will be using on a day-to-day basis, right? On a daily basis we will be using the services which we need to learn in these three domains, right? So there can be a scenario, right? I'm not saying that you should not be aware about it, right? What I usually say is this domain 4 is what will decide that if you like if you crack the exam or if you crack the certification or not, right? Because 82% like scoring 72% marks, around 72% marks from the 82% weightage is a bit difficult, right? You have to be very accurate in this case. But if you are even good enough in this particular domain, right, in that case you will be easily able to crack the certification, right? So again, I am not anyhow degrading this domain 4, but just talking about the frequency at which we use the services. That what I am saying, that in a domain, these three domains, the services we will be using on a day-to-day basis. So with that said, let's get started with the domain 3 part. Okay. So in domain 3, what our major task, right, and what all services related to these tasks we will be doing is we will be focusing on the data operations part. Means once the pipeline has been created, right, we have to operationalize that particular pipeline. Means we have to push that particular pipeline to a production so that it can be used. And the support part means once the pipeline has been pushed to the production phase, right, then we will have to look at that particular pipeline. We will have to do the visualization of the pipeline. Means if my pipeline is running fine or not, if it is not running correctly, what's the issue that I am getting, right? I have to troubleshoot the issue. I have to also, if it is running fine, I also have to monitor the performance of my pipeline, that if there is any kind of performance bottleneck in my pipeline, I have to clear that particular thing and make it more optimized as the time goes by. Okay. So all these things, right, comes under the data operations and support domain. So talking about the subdomain, so first of all, we will have to automate the data processing using the AWS services, right? The same thing, once the pipeline has been, so let's first of all understand that what all knowledge should we have for automating the data processing pipeline using AWS services. So first of all, how to maintain and troubleshoot data processing for repeatable business outcomes. Okay. Then API calls for data processing, right? Which services accept scripting, for example, Amazon EMR, Amazon Redshift, and AWS Glue. Okay. Now what does this thing means is, so let's suppose first of all we have created an ETL pipeline, right? So we have created our ETL pipeline and we have checked it into the you can say uh, UAT phase, or maybe in the testing phase, that my pipeline is running correctly, absolutely fine. And now I have to deploy that particular pipeline to the production. Okay. Once the pipeline, or let me do it in this way. Okay. Let me do it in this way. Okay. So let's say this is my ETL pipeline. So I am not adding any services or anything. Okay. This is my ETL pipeline in UAT. Okay. So UAT is nothing but in the testing. Okay. I can write also as testing phase, right? And my pipeline is running successfully in the testing phase. Now I will do what? Let's suppose this is my prod server, is my production server. I will deploy my pipeline to the production server. Okay. Now once this pipeline has been deployed to production one, right? Let's suppose this is, I am saying as log processing pipeline. Log processing pipeline, let's say, right? So this pipeline has been deployed to the production part. Okay. Now what I will do, it's like, it's not like that once I have deployed it to the production and my job is over. No, that is not the case. Once I have deployed this pipeline to production, I will be first of all visualizing this pipeline, right? I will be having some kind of dashboard kind of stuff. Okay. I'll be having some dashboard kind of stuff where I will be getting the insights of the pipeline. So I can say as this as pipeline dashboard. Okay. And I will be getting all the details of the pipeline, right? That how much time did pipeline took to run, right? Was it a success or not? If I got any failure, what was the failure, right? What all tasks? So obviously this ETL pipeline will not be doing one single processing, right? It will have multiple tasks, right? So what all tasks are getting performed in this particular pipeline? How much each individual task is? Time, how much time each and every individual task is taking to do the processing, right? How much data did we process? How much time did it take? Where ultimately my data got stored, and so on. There can be n number of things that we will be able to visualize using this pipeline dashboard. Okay. Now, if anything goes wrong, right, I will have to come to this particular dashboard. I will have to troubleshoot it. I will have to first of all be aware about what exactly went wrong. And then I can come on to this particular either UAT phase or maybe in the production. Obviously, I will not do it in the production, right? First of all, I will be doing it in the UAT phase, right? I will be fixing the issue in the UAT phase, and then I will be again redeploying it to the production part. Okay. Now this pipeline is running, right? And I am aware about the fact that this pipeline has to run on a daily basis. Okay. So this pipeline, this is the same pipeline, that is this pipeline, right? And I am aware about that this pipeline has to run, let's suppose every 6 hours. Okay. Every 6 hours it has to run, not after every. Okay, it has to run every 6 hours. So will I come every 6 hours manually to my dashboard? Let's suppose I have created this pipeline on my EMR, right? So I will have to log into my AWS account, then I will have to open my EMR service, then I'll have to look for this particular pipeline, and then I will have to trigger this pipeline. This is a manual process, right? What else I can do is I can automate this whole process, that I will write some kind of scripts, right? Or I will use some service that we will get to know, right? What all services can we use? And I will use that particular service to get the pipeline triggered automatically after every 6 hours. So let's suppose it gets triggered at 2 p.m. Later on, it will get automatically triggered at 8 p.m. Then later on it will automatically get triggered at 2 p.m. in the, sorry, 2 a.m. at the night, and so on. Okay. So how we can automate all these things? Okay. Automate the data by processing, and then maintain and troubleshoot the data processing of the repeatable business outcome. Again, as I have talked about it, that this pipeline again will be visualized in some kind of dashboard, pipeline dashboard, right? And here we will be able to visualize our visualize and maintain our pipeline, as well as is there, if there is any kind of trouble or if any kind of issue happens, we will be also be able to troubleshoot that particular issue. Then API calls for data processing, right? So let's suppose if you are getting some API responses, or even if there is some kind of data store that I am using to store my transformed data, so I can expose that particular data source as an API, so that like APIs can interact. I can hit that particular data source as an API call, and I can fetch the data from there. Okay. Which services accept scripting? Okay, scripting means if let's suppose we want to do some custom things, right? Let's suppose we want to do some custom transformation. If we have some complex kind of business logic that we have to write, that is not available on the you can say on the services that can be done, right? So then for that thing we will have to write our own code or our own script, and this script can be in any language, right? We can write it in SQL, we can write it in Python, we can write it in Java, maybe in Scala, right? Any programming language we can use. So all of the services don't accept scripting languages. Okay, all of the services, if I talk about, it's not necessary that all the services will be accepting the scripting or the programming languages that we will be writing for doing the complex business requirements or fulfilling the complex business requirements, I would say, right? So in that case, we should be aware about that which services accept the scripting part. That is, if I name a few services, so Amazon EMR is there, right? Amazon Elastic MapReduce, Amazon Redshift is there, and Amazon Glue is there, which accepts the scripting languages. Now talking about which all services should we have our skills in. So first of all, we should be able to orchestrate the data pipelines. Again, orchestration, I have already talked about it. So this kind of scheduling part is called an orchestration. Okay, this either if I have to do a scheduling something like this on a on some kind of interval, right? Or if we have to do a scheduling on some kind of event, both of them will be called as the orchestration of pipeline. So for that we have service called as Amazon MWAA, so which is nothing but managed service for the Apache Airflow. Okay, so this is nothing but a managed service of Apache Airflow itself, and we can also use AWS step functions for orchestrating the data pipeline. So this is, you can say, a full-fledged server, right? We will have to use a server to do these things, and step function is a kind of serverless kind of you can say service, okay, that we can use to orchestrate. Then troubleshooting Amazon managed workflows. Okay, so if there is any kind of issue, any kind of error that happens, so we should be able to troubleshoot the issue. We should be first of all get informed about the issue, that okay, this is the issue that happened in my workflow, in my ETL pipeline, and ultimately I should be able to fix it also. Then calling SDKs to access Amazon features from code, right? So we should be, so SDKs are nothing but software development kits, right? So we should be able to use SDKs, right, to access the Amazon features, means the Amazon services, using some kind of code also, right? So we have multiple SDKs, right? So if I talk about AWS SDKs, so we can use Python, right? We can use different programming languages, JavaScripts and all those things to access the services that will be there, and we can access these services using using the code itself. So here if you see build tools on AWS, this is not the one. Okay, here I can choose programming languages, right? So here you can see, so we can connect using SDK to the AWS services using C++. We can connect using .NET. We can connect using Go. We can connect using JS, JavaScript, Java, Kotlin, PHP, Python, Ruby, Rust, and Swift. Okay. So some of these are programming languages that are used to develop mobile applications. Like Kotlin is used to develop Android applications. Swift is used to develop iOS applications. Then some of the programming language like Python is used to you can say is one of the most used. Currently it's the most used programming language, I would say, right? The world is using Python, right? So even you can use Python to connect to different AWS services. So if you will click on Python, right, and okay, so resources on AWS. If I talk about the SDK, okay, so AWS SDK for Python. So I can click on this. So Boto 3, okay, it's a kind of library, or you can say it's a kind of SDK that is used for connecting to the AWS services using some kind of scripts, right? So if you come at the bottom, right, or even in the documentation itself, so you can do what? You can import Boto 3, right? And then you can do what? Boto 3.resources. In the codes, you will have to mention which all service, like which service do you want to connect to. So here it has mentioned S3, right? And we have created an object of it. Then for buckets in S3 dot bucket dot all, right, print the bucket name. So it will do what all buckets will be present in my S3 service. It will be basically listing it in the output. Okay. And again, you can go to this particular link where you will get all the information about Boto 3, right? So you can see here AWS SDK for Python, that is called as Boto 3. Develop and deploy applications using Boto 3. AWS SDK for Python makes it easy to call AWS services using idiomatic Python APIs. Okay, so just using API. So we will not even have to, you can say, log into our AWS account. Login means we will not have to use the UI. Okay, for sure we will have to do some kind of authentication using public and private keys once we are for the very first time. Then when we will be when we will try to connect our Boto 3 to the AWS services. Once that particular authentication has been done, right, then we will be only able to connect to the services just by using the API calls and just by using code. So you can see here, right? Boto 3 simplifies the use of AWS services by providing a set of libraries that are consistent and familiar for Python developers. All AWS SDKs support API lifecycle considerations such as credential management, retries, data marshalling, and serialization. The SDK is composed of two key Python packages. First one is Boto Core. So Boto Core is what? The library providing the low-level functionality shared between the Python SDK and AWS CLI. And then there is Boto 3, the package implementing the Python SDK itself. Okay, so it's a combination of these two packages. Then the AWS SDK for Python provides Python APIs for each AWS service. Using the SDK, you can build Python applications that work with Amazon S3, Amazon EC2, Amazon DynamoDB, and more. The SDK is available semantically version on this particular link, right? So this is a PyPy package link where you can click and you can get the different versions of the SDKs also if you want to use certain specific versions. So here you can click on for getting the code example. So if you want to connect to CloudWatch, if you want to connect to DynamoDB, if you want to connect to EC2, S3, right, Credential Manager, SES, right, SQS, and whatnot. Okay, so I can use even this one, I guess. Okay, so you can see here, right? So let's suppose if you want to connect to EC2, so you will have managing EC2 instances. So this is how you can connect to EC2. Import Boto 3, right? You can create an object boto3.client EC2, right? And then EC2.describe instances. You can store it in a variable called as response and you can print it. If you want to monitor it, you can also monitor the instances. You can start and stop the instances just like here in the code only. You can reboot the instance and so on. Okay. So you can read the documentation, right? I will not be covering these things right now because Currently, we are not focusing on these things. Okay. Then using the features of AWS services to process the data. For example, Amazon EMR and Amazon Redshift and AWS Glue. Okay, so we can use these services to process our data. Usually we are using either EMR, right, if we are provisioning our server, and if we are using some kind of serverless kind of stuff, then we will go ahead with AWS Glue. Then consuming and maintaining data APIs. Okay, so how we will consume and how we will maintain our APIs. Preparing data transformation. For example, AWS Glue, Data Brew, right? Querying the data, for example, Amazon Athena. Then using Lambda to automate data processing and managing events and schedulers, for example, Event Bridge. Right? So, like if we want to basically prepare the data, right? If we want to do some kind of data transformations, then we can use services like AWS EMR, Amazon Redshift, and AWS Glue. Right? We should also be again aware about how we can consume and maintain the data APIs pipeline, maybe using SDKs or maybe using any external APIs if required. Right? Then preparing the data for transformation, right? Doing some kind of data validation checks and all those things, right? So preparing data for transformation, then querying the data, right? Once the data has been dumped into some kind of data source, we will have to query the data from there also. So for doing that, we can use Amazon Athena. And then how we can use Lambda to automate the data processing. So Lambda will be usually used when there is some kind of event driven pipeline that we want to use, or we event driven data processing we want to use. In that case, we can use Lambda. Okay. And then managing events and schedulers, and we will be using Event Bridge, AWS Event Bridge, for managing events and schedulers. Then there can be task sub domain 2, right? If I talk about the domain 3, that is analyze data using AWS services. Okay. So here we should have the knowledge of trade-off between provisioned services and serverless services. The exact thing that I was talking about here. Here, right? That we should be aware about the fact that when we have to provision a service, right? When we have to provision a full-fledged service like Amazon EMR, and when we can use services like AWS Glue for doing our task. So we should be aware about this particular fact. And moving forward, for sure, we will be talking about these things in a very, very great detail. Then SQL queries. So for example, select statement with multiple qualifiers and join clause, right? So basically, all in all, we should be also aware about SQL queries, right? We should be in a situation that we can write and we can query the data from the data sources, whatever data is required. Either we have one single data source or we have multiple data sources, depends on our use case. Okay. Then how to visualize data for analysis, right? Again, the data visualization part is also important if I talk about the module 3 of our certification exam. Then when and how to applying cleaning techniques, right? Once we have got our data, right? Once we have ingested our data, how first of all we will apply the cleaning technique, and when we have to apply the cleaning technique, right? So do we have to apply the cleaning technique when we are ingesting our raw data, or first of all we have to dump that particular raw data, and after dumping that particular data into some data source, after that we will have to apply the cleaning technique, and so on. So again, depends on the requirement, depends on the volume of the data, the velocity of the data, and so on. Then data aggregation, right? Rolling average, grouping, and pivoting. So again, these are the concepts of SQL itself, right? Aggregation, rolling averages, grouping, and pivoting. These are nothing but a concept of SQL, right? So again, I will be saying, and I will be repeating myself, guys, that SQL is the backbone of data engineering. If you are not comfortable with SQL, if you have not covered the advanced concept of SQL, then data engineering can be a bit difficult for you guys, right? Writing the ETL pipelines, maybe fetching the data from different sources, or even creating the data modeling and all those things can be a bit difficult. I'm not saying that you cannot do it, but it will be a bit difficult for you guys to understand those concepts, right? Then for doing these things, what all services you should have your skills in, right? So you should have skills in visualizing data using AWS services and tools. For example, AWS Glue Data Brew, AWS Amazon QuickSight, verifying and cleaning data, for example, Lambda, Athena, and QuickSight, Jupyter Notebook, Amazon SageMaker, Data Wrangler. Okay, using Athena to query data or to create views, and using Athena notebooks that use Apache Spark to explore the data. Okay, so for doing these things, we should be aware about AWS Glue, Data Brew, or Amazon QuickSight. So these two services are basically used for the data visualization part. Okay, then if we want to create some kind of or if we want to do some kind of data processing, right, or data cleaning, in that particular case, either we can use Lambda, we can use Athena, we can use QuickSight, we can use Jupyter Notebook, we can use AWS or Amazon SageMaker, Data Wrangler also. Again, we should be aware about the differences between these services, that in which condition or in for which problem statement we should be using which service, right? Using Athena, how we will be able to query the data and create the views, we should be aware about it, right? And using Athena notebook, how we can use Apache Spark, right, to explore our data. So if we are dealing with a big data, in that particular case, we will be using Spark to handle and Spark to basically visualize the data, to do the data transformation and all those stuff. So we should also be aware about SQL, as well as we should also be aware about Spark, not too much, but at least the basics of Spark, right? And if you're aware about SQL, I guess understanding the Spark concepts and all those things will not be very, very difficult for you guys to understand that particular thing. Cool. Okay, so now let's talk about the third subdomain, right, which will be to maintain and monitor the data pipeline. Okay, so basically how we will be maintaining and how we will be monitoring our data pipeline. So here we should have the knowledge of how to log application data, best practices for performance tuning, how to access AWS, how to log access AWS services. We should be aware about how you can use Amazon Mice, AWS Cloud Trial, and Amazon CloudWatch. Okay, so these are the services that we should be aware about. Means once we have created our pipeline, right? Once we have created our data pipeline, now the thing that comes into the picture is how we will be able to maintain and how we will be able to monitor our pipeline, right? So first of all, we should have our logs that should get created, right? Our application or our ETL pipeline should create some kind of logs, and using those logs we will be able to monitor, right? Even if it is running successfully or if it is running unsuccessfully, right? Both of the monitoring will require some kind of log production. Okay, then the best practices for performance tuning. So if you are getting any performance bottlenecks, right, if you are not able to do some kind of task uh, in the required given period of time, in that particular case, how we can do and how we can manage that particular task to be done quickly, right? So that is what performance tuning is. How we will basically access the logs of the AWS services that are getting produced, right? So if my, let's suppose I'm using EC2 instance, so is my EC2 running perfectly fine or not? That all things also we have to visualize and we have to monitor on a day-to-day basis, right? And for doing all those things, we have services like Amazon Mice, we have service like AWS Cloud Trial, and we have service like Amazon CloudWatch. Then we should have skills in extracting logs for audits, right? So once the logs are getting produced, we should extract those logs and we should audit those logs, right? So log auditing will do what? It will try to like give us the performance, right? We will be able to know that, okay, which pipeline is performing best, right? Which task is getting stuck at for what reason, right? Where my let's suppose data is getting changed, right? Where did the frequency of the data changed, right? Which let's say service is having less availability, and so on. There can be multiple insights that we can get from our logs. Then deploying logging and monitoring solution to facilitate auditing and traceability. Okay, so how we will be able to first of all deploy and how we will be monitor, like how we'll monitor these logs using solutions that will facilitate what? That will facilitate basically the auditing that I just now talked about, and the traceability. How traceability can be traced is, let's suppose I have xyz.csv file, right? So I will be maintaining a trace of it. Means xyz.csv file got produced by this particular service, then it got ingested into this service. Later on, it got transformed, right? And it got, let's suppose, joined with some ABC dot like let's suppose ABC table and ABC table and so on. So this is what the traceability of that particular file is, right? Then using notifications during monitoring to send alert. Okay, so notification is one of the most important thing and one of the most, I would say, uh, first of all, it is for sure important, and I would say one of the most least like one of the least regarded thing. Means that people don't usually focus on creating the notifications, right? And that's where usually they uh, like I would say create a kind of tech debt on their self. Means in, if you're not creating any kind of notification, right, in that particular case, either even though you have automated the things, even though you have automated the pipelines, but ultimately there will be some kind of manual intervention that will have to be done, right? You will have to log into your AWS account, and then you will have to see that if my pipeline ran successfully or not, right? If it failed or not, right? But if we have created some notifications for the monitoring part, let's suppose for both success and failure, right? Even if my pipeline fails, then also I will be notified via some kind of email, right? Or maybe some kind of Slack message. as well as if my pipeline runs successfully, then also I should be notified that okay, the XYZ pipeline, it ran successfully, it took this much time to run, and so on, so that I don't have to then manually go on to the platform on AWS and to check all those things. So notification plays a major role if I talk about a full-fledged automation. Then troubleshooting performance issues. Okay, so if there is any kind of performance issues, how we will be able to first of all, how we will be able to know about it, and then how we will be able to troubleshoot it. Then using CloudTrail to track API calls. Okay, then troubleshooting and maintaining pipelines. So how we can use AWS Glue, how we can use Amazon EMR for doing all these things. Then using Amazon Cloud Watch logs to log application data with a focus on configuration and automation. Okay, so we can use Amazon Cloud Watch logs where we will be able to log like we will be able to use that particular thing or that particular service as a log application where we will be able to basically monitor and produce our application logs. Then analyzing logs with AWS services, for example, Athena, Amazon EMR, Amazon OpenSearch Service, CloudWatch Logs Insight, CloudWatch Logs Insight, and Big Data Log applications. Okay. Then the fourth subdomain or the submodule can be ensuring the data quality, right? So again, maintaining the data quality and the data consistency. Nowadays, it's a very, very big task, right? Because if we are not having a good quality data, ultimately it's of no use to us. So we should have the knowledge of data sampling techniques, right? How we can implement the data skewness mechanisms, how data validation can be done, means how we can validate the data completeness, data consistency, its accuracy, and its integrity, right? And the data profiling part. So for doing these things, we should have skills in running data quality checks while processing the data. For example, checking for empty fields, defining the data quality rules. For example, AWS Glue Data Brew, and investigating the data consistency. For example, again, AWS Data Brew. So all these things for sure I will be covering right in a great detail when I will be discussing about these services that we have learned in what? Data operations and support. Okay. So once we have created our pipeline, once our pipeline has been deployed to the production, it's not the end of our job. It's, I would say, the beginning of our job, right? Once it has been operationalized, then we have to keep a track of our pipeline. We have to keep a track of the logs of that particular pipeline. We have to keep a track of the performance, right? We have to keep a track that if there is any kind of trouble, how we can troubleshoot it. We have to keep the track of the schema changes. We have to keep a track of the maybe the frequency change and whatnot, right? So once we have deployed our pipeline to production, it's not the end of our job, it's the beginning of our job, I would say. Okay. And for doing those things, how we will be able to analyze, right? How we will be able to analyze, how we will be automating those things, right? Again, automation plays a major important role. Once we have created the automations, how we will set up the notifications, right? How we will set up our application logs, and all those things is again a part of this module. Okay. Next, we will cover the domain 4 or the module 4, that is data security and governance. Again, it's not having that much of weightage if I talk about the certification point of view, but this is the domain which sets you apart from the usual data engineers, right? Because as I have already talked about it, that usually you will not get a chance to work in this particular domain in your organization, because if you are not at a high authority role, maybe some kind of data architect, or you are a data manager, right? Or maybe you are some kind of VP or something. In that case, you will have these accesses, right? Else you will not have these access to provide these things in your organization, right? If you are a developer or if you are a senior data engineer kind of role, in that case, you will not have the access to all these things, right? So we will not be able to learn these things and implement these things in our app, in our corporate or in our organization, right? But we should be aware about all these things, because obviously it's again important for the certification point of view, as well as for our knowledge also, right? Again, security and governance plays a major role if I talk about the data domain. Cool. So we will be covering this thing in the next video, in the coming forward video, right? So with that said, I will end this video till here only. I hope you guys learned something new in this video. I will see you in the next one. Till then, keep learning and keep growing. Bye bye.